Okay, so all of the Karlov Manor cards have been spoiled, and we've taken a look at all of them. We know what to expect, but I'm a little hazy on what all of the mechanics do. So we're going to react to this guy's video on it. This is a video by MTG Recon called "Here's Every Murders at Karlov Manor Mechanic Explained." So this guy's going to help us understand how each mechanic works and what we can expect. So let's take a look.
Both new and returning mechanics. With so many new and powerful cards, making sure you understand exactly how they work is important. So let's break down all of the mechanics of Murders at Karlov Manor. First off is the Disguise mechanic. Disguise is a morph, allowing you to play a creature or permanent face down as a
Yeah, so we already knew about this one. So Disguise is just a new flavor of morph. You play a card from your hand for 3 colorless mana. It comes in as a 2/2. Only this variation of it, it comes in as a 2/2, but with Ward 2. So, and then you can flip the card up. You flip the card over, and it becomes its true self by paying its disguise cost. Or in some cases, its true mana cost. And then when it flips over, sometimes it will have a flip over effect, sometimes it won't. All depends on the card.
2/2 with Ward 2, and then turn it face up for its disguise cost. It functions exactly the same as Morph, except the creature face down has Ward 2, so it's still 3 mana to play face down, and then whatever that disguise cost is to turn it face up. Oftentimes, cards will have effects when you turn them face up, and these are...
Yeah, exactly. This is what I was talking about. So when Gadget Technician enters the battlefield or is turned face up, create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying. Yeah, totally good. There's another one, I think it was called Hunted Bone Beast, and that one had like a pretty detrimental effect if you just played it directly from your hand. But if you flipped it using the disguise cost, you could evade that that drawback.
Kind of instant speed tricks that can kind of throw your opponents off. They also make attacking and blocking incredibly difficult for your opponent, so they're really fun and limited. To help you differentiate between a mysterious creature and morphs and manifests of the past, there is a helper card in the set that looks like this, and you can put this on top of your...
Oh, well, this is kind of cool. A mysterious creature. 2/2 creature. You can cover a face-down creature with this reminder card. A face-down creature that was cloaked or cast with disguise has Ward 2. Okay, cool. So you'll probably see those coming in the physical booster packs.
Face down creatures to represent them as 2/2s with Ward 2. Now, just like Morph, there are a bunch of weird rules surrounding this, and we're going to go over some of the most important ones here. First off, it is always 3 mana to cast a Disguise face down, and when you do so, it is a creature spell on the stack that is colorless with no mana value. On the battlefield, it's still a colorless creature with no mana value that's a 2/2, except now it's actually...
That's something that's very important to remember, is the fact that it does not have a mana value. So cards that care about that, like Smother, or other cards that say like you get like a benefit if the creature had a mana value of like 2 or less, like say Fading Hope. Fading Hope is an instant for a single blue that says bounce target creature, and if that creature had a mana value of 2 or less, you get to scry. So since this does not have a mana value, you would treat that mana value as 0.
Actually a creature that can be turned face up at any time. Interestingly, it doesn't use the stack, so it gets around things like Split Second, allowing you to do things when you normally couldn't. You're also not allowed to confuse your opponents using these, so if you have 3 face down creatures, you're not allowed to like shuffle them around to make sure your opponents don't know which one is which. You have to make it clear which one's which at all times. And obviously, your opponents aren't
that's good to
know
know.
What the face down creature is.
I was not aware of that.
The one that ended up on the far left be the one that originally was in the middle to try and confuse your opponents on when they were played in the game. The last major thing is that whenever a disguised creature leaves the battlefield, if it was face down, you must reveal it, even if it's going to a hidden zone.
Okay. So when a disguised creature dies, flip it over so everyone knows what it was, and then throw it in the graveyard. That could potentially be useful for like on death triggers. So like if the disguised creature was actually a creature, then it going to the graveyard would trigger something like, when this goes to the graveyard, deal 2 damage, that kind of thing.
ensure that you didn't just put a card that didn't have disguise on the battlefield face down. This also applies to when the game ends, so make sure that if you win or lose or the game ties or whatever, you turn all of your creatures face up so your opponents can see. Otherwise, technically you're breaking the rules. And while there's a million other rules,
the last
major important one is that when you turn a creature face up, it is still the same creature, so any auras or equipment that are attached to that creature will stay, and it does not trigger enter the battlefield abilities, only abilities that say when this creature is turned face up. And as an expansion of that, if a creature that was disguised turns face up and it was blocking, it is still blocking. If it was tapped, it's still tapped. And if it had counters on it, there are still counters on it. An example.
Okay, yeah, good. So, good thing to note here is that when you flip the card, it's not leaving play. It's just kind of transforming. So, like, anything that was affecting it before is still affecting it now.
Of this is Dog Walker, which is a 3/1 for 2, and you can just play it as that, but you can also disguise it face down for 3 mana and then turn it face up for 2 hybrid red-white, and when you do, when it's turned face up, you create 2 tapped 1/1 white dog creature tokens. You get extra value if you play it slowly.
Make yourself some good boys.
Opponents off thinking that maybe the creature only has 2 power, but really it has 3, getting a sneaky kill on one of your opponent's attackers. Now that was a lot.
Yeah, that's one thing that you're probably going to be seeing the most of is people flipping disguised creatures during combat to get extra damage in.
But a lot of it also applies to this next mechanic, which is Cloak. If disguise is more...
So, Cloak, this was one that I was a little iffy on, because I've seen some cards that read cloak cards from the top of your library. So I was a little curious on how that actually works.
Morph, then Cloak is Manifest. Cloak is something you'll be instructed.
Manifest. 2/2 creature. You can cover a face-down manifested creature with its reminder card. A manifested creature card can be turned face up anytime. Okay, so it's just a different version of the morph creatures.
Instructed to do. So for example, you may be instructed to cloak the top card of your library, and if you are, you put it face down on the battlefield, and it's a 2/2 with ward.
Okay, so that's really curious. So when you cloak something from your library, you just take that card and you just move it from the top of the library directly down to the table, still face down, and then it is now a 2/2 creature with ward 2. Interesting.
That is true whether the card is an instant, a sorcery, a creature, a land, anything, you will put it face down on the battlefield as a 2/2. But if it is a creature, you can turn it face up anytime for its mana cost, allowing you to kind of throw your opponents off with cards that don't actually have disguise or morph and flipping them face up. If there happens to be another ability on the card that allows you to turn it face up like disguise or morph, you can also pay that cost if it happens to be cheaper. All the rules that apply to disguises also apply to...
That's interesting. That's not something that's going to be relevant for the current meta, but for like older formats and maybe even like Commander, that would absolutely be relevant. So you just turn it up for its morph cost instead of the disguise cost.
A cloaked card, so you have to reveal them as they leave zones, and they have to be revealed at the end of the game. They're still the same when they flip face up, and they are a face down creature whether or not the bottom card is a creature or not. An example of this can be found on Atrada, Deadly Fugitive, which is a 3-cost blue and black 1/4 with a couple abilities, but the one we care about is that bottom one that says whenever an assassin you control deals combat damage to an opponent, cloak the top card of that player's library, allowing you to...
Interesting. Whenever an assassin you control deals combat damage to an opponent, cloak the top of that player's library. Now, does that give you the card off the top of their library? If that's true, then that's an amazing card.
To take the top card of that player's library and put it on your side as a 2/2 with ward 2, and then it can be turned face up if it happens to be a creature. And again, cloak can happen from anywhere. It just has to happen to a card. So it can be a card in a graveyard, in a library.
I might have to play Atrada.
It can be anywhere. And while those two mechanics were incredibly complicated, the next one is quite a simple one, and actually one that is returning from a past set. It is Investigate. Investigate is a keyword action that...
Investigate, that's a no-brainer. Just make a clue token.
It just simply says create a clue token. So a card might say whenever you draw a card, create a clue token. Although that card in particular would be quite broken, cards may instruct you to create a clue token for a various number of reasons. If you're not sure what a clue token is, it's an artifact token that lets you pay 2 and sacrifice it to draw a card. So it's kind of like a delayed card draw effect. An example of this is on Novice Inspector, a 1-cost 1/2 that when it enters the battlefield, you investigate. So essentially...
Which is funny because this is actually a functional reprint of Thraben Inspector. It does exactly the same thing, same mana cost, same power and toughness, same everything. But now, if you are playing an older format, now you get to use 4 Novice Inspector and 4 Thraben Inspector. So that's pretty cool.
Essentially, you're getting a 1/2 and a clue for 1 mana. It's actually quite good. The next one is a little more complicated and brand new, but it is very flavorful. It is Suspect. Suspect is a...
Now, this is probably one of my favorite mechanics from this set. I love the idea of suspecting a creature and like suspecting an opponent's creature, making it unable to block and just swinging through, or giving your own creature suspect, giving it menace, and being able to swing past a single blocker. I like that effect a lot.
Keyword action that will have you target a creature, so it'll be written as suspect target creature. If a creature becomes a suspect, it becomes suspected and basically has menace and can't block. There are also a bunch of cards that care about if cards are suspected, like Augur's Cost, who as part of his ability will exile a creature if it's already suspected, and otherwise it will...
Flavor-wise, I think Augur's Cost is really cool. Like, he's a ghost, but he's still out here trying to solve crimes. It's so funny.
Suspect it. It's an interesting mechanic where sometimes you're going to want to target your own stuff to give it menace and make it not be able to block, or sometimes you're going to want to target your opponent's stuff, making it not be able to block, and as a side effect, giving it menace. An important thing to note is that it remains suspected until it either becomes not suspected due to a card saying that, or until it leaves the battlefield.
I love the art on this card. Just a quick aside, this art is really beautiful. It's super stylized and I love it.
So this is a permanent thing you do have to track, and there are trackers included in occasional packs. The next mechanic is Collect Evidence, which is more of a cost than a mechanic, but you'll see it on a couple.
Every mechanic is kicker. This is just kicker. It's a new flavor of kicker.
Different cards. When you collect evidence, you'll collect evidence a certain number. So for example, on Axebane Feryx, it is collect evidence 4. In order to collect evidence 4, you must exile 4 mana value worth of cards from your graveyard. So that could be 4 1-drops, or a 1/4-drop, or a 3-drop and a 2-drop. You just have to hit at least that number, and you can exile any number, either that number or higher. This can be used for ward cost, or more commonly for extra
It's actually
cost to cast
a
spells.
really
For example,
easy
Bite Down a
requirement
Crime
to
is
get to,
normally
too.
a 4-cost green sorcery that has target creature you control get +2/+0 until end of turn, and then it deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. But as an additional cost to cast the spell, you may collect evidence 6, and if you do, the spell costs 2 less to cast if evidence was collected. So it's essentially
decent card.
A 4-cost spell or a 2-cost spell that also requires you to exile some stuff. It kind of reminds me of Delve in that way, except it won't always be a cost thing. For example, V2 Gauzy Inspector is a 2-cost 1/3 that allows you to collect evidence 6, and when it enters the battlefield, if evidence was collected, you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature and you gain 2 life. So here it's always a 2-drop, it just has some extra value if you collected evidence. The final new mechanic is Cases. This is a subtype of enchantment.
These are pretty cool. Like they're not quite sagas, because they don't always go away once you've completed them. One thing I was curious about with the Cases was there's a little bit like reminder text on the case that says, like, if at end of turn the case remains unsolved, like, solve the case. So I'm like, if that's true, does that mean that I just put it on the table and wait until end of turn and it solves itself? Is that what's going on?
And that looks like this. It kind of has the same frame as classes, but with Cases, they're broken up into 3 parts.
Yeah, like, look at this right here. It says, if unsolved, solve at the beginning of your end step.
The top part is an ability that's always active. So for example, on Case of the Filched Falcon, it enters the battlefield and then investigates. Then it'll have a solving condition. For example, on Case of the Filched Falcon, it says you control 3 or more artifacts, which means if the case is unsolved, at the beginning of your end step, if you control 3 or more artifacts, it becomes solved.
Oh, okay. You control 3 more artifacts. Okay, so you do still have to fulfill the conditions.
Once it becomes solved, it permanently stays solved and activates the ability at the bottom. So for example, with this one, it lets you pay 3 mana to sacrifice the case to put 4 +1/+1 counters on a non-creature artifact and turn it into a bird. The point is, these are incredibly versatile cards that will vary in what they do. Some might have ETBs, some
I actually like these cards. It's a cool new card type.
Really hard or really easy, and the ability that you get after solving them can vary wildly. Another example is Case of the Ransacked Lab, which for 3 mana makes it so instants and sorcery spells you cast.
This card's wild. I actually want to play this card. Just for that solve part at the end.
cast costs 1 less to cast. Then to solve, you must have cast 4 or more instant and sorcery spells this turn, which is quite difficult. But then whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you get to draw a card once you've solved the case. This is an example of a case that has a pretty solid always active ability.
This is absolutely a card that you're going to want to play in like an Is It spell slinger deck. Like you just build the deck right, and this card will go off no problem.
Kind of difficult solve condition and a very powerful solved ability that you unlock. So those are the major mechanics of Murders at Karlov Manor. However, there are a couple things to note. First off, there are mechanics that only show up once or maybe twice on high rarity cards. For example, Wither shows up on Massacre Girl. This does not mean Wither is a major mechanic of the set, but it's just something they've been doing recently with sets. Second, while we didn't talk about it, Surveil does have a commander precon with this set. It's a deck that cares all about the Surveil mechanic. In case you aren't aware, if you Surveil a number, it means you look at that many cards from the top of your library, and then you can put them back in any order.
Yeah, but that's more for commander, so I'm not too worried about that. It's a graveyard
version of Scry, and it's very powerful. So yes, those are the mechanics of Murders at Karlov Manor. I want to know your thoughts on all of it in the comments down below, and if you want to see more content from me.
Okay, there you go. So that actually answered a couple questions that I had, and I'm pretty happy about it. Mainly this question right here, the if unsolved, solve at the beginning of your end step. Because like the way that I read that originally, it read to me like just let this sit on the table, and if you go to your end step without solving this, it will just solve automatically. So now that I know, you do still have to fulfill the conditions. So that's good to know. Let's see. Anything else? Suspect. Suspect was really good. Let's see. What's this? Oh, yeah. The cloak mechanic. Cloak mechanic was also something that I was a little curious about because I didn't know about the pulling cards from the top of your library. So with the whole cloak thing, you can pull something from the top of your library, regardless of what it is, and put it into play as a disguised creature. So that was actually pretty interesting. So good. I'm glad to get some level of clarity on the new mechanics for this set and what they actually do. Cool. So this video was given to us by MTG Recon. So we're going to make sure to put a link to this video in the description. And so I would recommend that you go and visit this guy's site as well. Give him a sub, give him a like on his video. And I think I will do exactly the same. Give him a sub right now. Cool.